Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving deep into the recent Wild Iron event patch for Apex Legends. Specifically, we're looking at those pretty extensive Legend balance updates. These adjustments they're clearly designed to significantly reshape a competitive play and the overall player experience, and they've definitely got people talking. So the central question we'll unpack from the source material, Get Explosive, and the Wild Iron event is this. Have these recent Legend balance updates effectively achieved, a healthier and more diverse meta? Or do they maybe introduce new points of contention, new potential imbalances? Personally, I'm firmly in the camp that these changes represent a strategic and pretty successful refinement of the Legend roster. I think it's moving us towards a more dynamic and skill-expressive landscape.
And I absolutely acknowledge the clear intentions behind these updates. I really do. But I'd contend that many of these changes, despite being well-meaning, carry some significant risks. We might be looking at new imbalances or maybe just different kinds of frustration emerging, perhaps even missed opportunities for a truly diverse meta. So I think it's crucial we scrutinize the potential downsides, the unforeseen consequences alongside what the developers were aiming for.
Right, so my position is that this latest patch really showcases an effective strategy. Targeted nerfs to the Legends doing too well, coupled with some meaningful buffs to the underperformers. This isn't just random tweaking, It feels like a deliberate effort to foster a more dynamic, less predictable meta. Take Ashe, for instance. The developers explicitly said, despite nerfs in recent patches, Ashe has stayed at the top of the pack. So what did they do? They bumped her dash cooldown up to 12 seconds from 8 and, crucially, removed her dual breach upgrade entirely. These are like direct responses designed to make it, and I quote, easier to punish Ashe's misplays. And beyond that, her arc snare, it now breaks more easily, has a shorter base duration, 6 seconds down from 8, less pulling strength, and it doesn't even do extra shield damage anymore. These are pretty comprehensive adjustments, aimed at reining in that oppressive crowd control and mobility, demanding more thoughtful play.
Okay, I get the thinking behind those changes for Ashe, especially the idea of making misplays more punishable. That makes sense on paper. However, I'm genuinely not convinced these nerfs really fundamentally alter her core utility in a way that truly balances her. The patch also introduces a new longer reach upgrade, right? Which boosts her phase breach ultimate range by 25 meters. Now, couldn't this new upgrade in certain situations kind of partially counteract those mobility nerfs? It still allows for really critical long-distance repositioning. My worry is whether we're truly seeing a fundamental shift in her meta presence, or if players will just adapt her existing powerful kit. It might just shift the source of frustration for opponents, rather than achieving real balance. How do you see teams realistically managing that persistent repositioning ability, even with a longer dash cooldown, when her ultimate can still cover so much ground?
That's a fair question, yeah. And I think it points to, a nuanced understanding of her kit. While longer reach does extend her ultimate's range, the removal of dual breach, I think, is a much more significant strategic hit. It hits her immediate tactical versatility and her combat engagement potential. You've lost that second immediate reposition or escape option. It forces Ashe players to be way more deliberate with their single ultimate use, making the stakes of a misplay much, much higher. It's really about reducing her burst mobility and that crowd control pressure, not completely eliminating her map traversal. It encourages a more strategic, less, spammy playstyle. But okay, let's shift focus a bit to the Legends they wanted to lift up. Mad Maggie, for example. The patch notes explicitly aim to give her a bit more reliability and team utility. And honestly, I think they really delivered here. She got substantial buffs. A 10% faster firing animation for her riot drill, it's immediate now on button release, and a 25% faster throw animation for her wrecking ball, which is also apparently more reliable at moving around obstacles. And crucially, her speed pads, they now give a fortified buff for 3.5 seconds, up from 2, and they last 20 seconds. This offers some really powerful push and rotation options for her squad, in a way she just didn't have before. Plus that new gun running upgrade, it enhances her close-range game by extending her passive speed boost to SMGs and pistols. These aren't just tiny tweaks. They feel like comprehensive enhancements designed to make her a much more formidable, team-oriented Legend.
That's a compelling case for Mad Maggie, I'll give you that. And I agree, she's received some interesting buffs. However, while the fortified speed pads sound good for team utility, the patch notes also mention a pretty critical detail. They deactivate 6 seconds for the player using it after being used. How do you square that with the idea of powerful push and rotation options in a sustained team fight? I mean, doesn't that deactivation window potentially limit the consistency of continuous aggressive plays or sustained team pushes, especially in the chaos of a third party showing up? It feels like it could undermine the very team utility they're aiming for. It adds a timing element that might be a pretty significant practical constraint, wouldn't you say?
I think that specific timing element, the 6-second deactivation, isn't really a limitation so much as a design choice. It encourages strategic burst engagements, rather than just perpetual thoughtless use. It means Maggie players need to be smart about when they commit to a push, which honestly aligns perfectly with her aggressive, disruptive design. It makes her utility a high-impact, calculated decision, not just a constant speed boost. Now let's look at Seer. The goal here was to bring Seer back into the meta while carefully avoiding some of the issues that made him feel oppressive before. And I think they've done a masterful job, honestly. Key base skid improvements like Long View, that's the 75-meter passive tactical range, and Artist Reach, the 50-meter ultimate throw range, they're permanent now. His tactical focus of attention, it now gives a 4-second speed boost to Seer himself on hit. The scan duration is up to 4 seconds, and there's that new energizing focus upgrade granting 25 shields on hit. These changes inject some serious in-combat power directly into his kit. But at the same time, they address the old frustrations by cutting his silence duration down to a much more manageable 2.5 seconds. To me, this looks like a very thoughtful and balanced way to bring him back into competitive play.
I'm looking at Seer's return maybe through a slightly different lens. While, yeah, the reduced silence duration is definitely a welcome change. Nobody liked that 8-second silence. But I'm concerned that the combination of his longer scan duration, the speed boost he gets on a tactical hit, and that new Lasting Beats ultimate upgrade, the one that reveals enemies for 5 seconds after they leave his dome, might just shift his oppressive nature, not eliminate it. So instead of a long silence, we could be looking at a new kind of persistent tracking, constant information gathering oppression. It kind of feels like the old frustration of being silenced is just being replaced with perpetual tracking, creating a different but maybe equally frustrating experience for opponents. Do you really think the counterplay options are truly enhanced here? Or have we just kind of traded one problem for another?
That's a thoughtful way to frame it. Yeah, I appreciate the concern about just shifting the oppression. However, I believe the emphasis now on Seer's active combat utility with the tactical speed boost and the shield regen fundamentally changes his playstyle, and by extension, the available counterplay. He's no longer just like a passive info gatherer sitting back. He's rewarded for directly engaging. And that creates more windows for opponents to actually disrupt him. Rather than just having to sit there and wait out a long silence, it demands more direct interaction, I think. Which brings us squarely to the core debate around Ash's adjustments, that balance between punishment and utility. My argument is simply that these nerfs are incredibly precise. They directly target her persistent high mobility and, let's be honest, the truly oppressive nature of her arc snare. Making misplays easier to punish, as the devs intended, that fundamentally alters how she can be played safely. And the removal of dual breach, in my view, that's a pivotal strategic reduction in her tactical versatility. It's a comprehensive approach that ensures she's still viable, sure, but now demands significantly more skill and deliberate engagement. She's moved from being almost an automatic pick to more of a nuanced strategic choice, which, that's the hallmark of a healthier, more diverse meta, right?
Okay, I'll concede that the dash cooldown and the arc snared changes do make Ash more punishable in certain scenarios. I see that. However, my concern isn't really about her overall viability. It's whether these changes truly address the root cause of her dominance in the meta. When we factor in that new longer reach upgrade for her phase breach, giving her an extra 25 meters on her ultimate, she still keeps an incredibly powerful traversal and repositioning tool. In high-stakes competitive play, especially during late-game rotations or tough zone pulls, that increased ultimate range can absolutely negate some of the impact of the slower dash cooldown. It lets her bypass fights or grab crucial positions with relative ease. So the question for me still remains, do these nerfs fundamentally alter her strategic value?
Or do they just require players to adapt her existing powerful kit?
Maybe just shifting the source of frustration for opponents, rather than fully balancing her for a genuinely diverse pool of legend picks. It feels, I don't know, like a bit of a lateral move in some ways, not a fundamental shift in how she disrupts the battlefield.
Remember, it is her ultimate. It's a high-value ability. It has a longer cooldown than her tactical did, especially when she could potentially chain them with the old upgrade. Losing dual breach means her immediate and frequent tactical engagements and escapes are significantly cut back. That ultimate requires careful timing, commitment. Her old tactical could be used much more reactively. This forces a much higher skill ceiling and reduces her raw relentless pressure. It's a significant reduction in her immediate combat utility and escape potential, pushing players towards more thoughtful play in those moment-to-moment skirmishes. Okay, let's shift back to Maggie and Seer. I firmly believe these aren't just like tiny incremental buffs, they represent genuine potential meta shakeups. Maggie's enhanced riot drill, her more reliable wrecking ball, coupled with that fortified buff on the speed pads and the gun running upgrade, it provides a robust, multifaceted approach to team utility and aggression that was just missing before. She can now initiate, push, and sustain pressure in ways that directly challenge static defenses. And similarly, Seer's permanent base kit upgrades, that tactical speed boost, the shield regeneration, they empower him with significant in-combat power. These feel like strategic retoolings designed to genuinely elevate their roles and shake up the meta, just like the developers intended. They offer new options and strategies that simply weren't as viable before.
Sorry, I just don't quite buy that it's a full meta shakeup for Maggie, especially when you think about the practicalities in a messy team fight. Let me tell you why. The effectiveness of her fortified speed pads, like we talked about, is explicitly limited by that 6-second deactivation window for the user. So yes, it encourages burst plays, but it also means sustained team pushes or fluid aggressive maneuvers can be seriously restricted. Imagine trying to push a fortified position. That short activation window before it deactivates for the user could leave her vulnerable, or just break the team's momentum. And for Seer, look, the silence duration is reduced, great, but the combo of the longer scan duration, the speed boost on hit, and the lasting beats upgrade revealing enemies for 5 seconds after they leave his ult dome, that could just lead to a new form of constant info-gathering oppression. It really feels like the old, frustrating silence has just been swapped for perpetual, unavoidable tracking. It maintains a potentially frustrating opponent experience rather than eliminating it. It's maybe a different flavor of an oppressive legend, not necessarily a balanced one that opens up genuine new counterplay.
But I think you're underestimating the agency Seer now has in combat, which fundamentally changes the dynamic. That tactical speed boost and shield regen, they force him to actually be in the fight, making him a target, rather than just a passive information source lurking in the back. That creates opportunities for counterplay that just didn't exist when his silence was the main factor. And for Maggie, look, the design isn't for sustained, tank-like pushes, it's for explosive, aggressive entries. The deactivation encourages smart, decisive plays, not endless ones. That's a key distinction, I think. Okay, let's touch on Caustic and Sparrow quickly. That fine line between making legends forgiving, as the notes say, and maybe just rendering them weak. The changes to Caustic's gas and Sparrow's abilities, they seem to represent a necessary balance between a legend's core identity and addressing widespread player frustration. Caustic's gas, now more forgiving because damage ramps up slower and there's no aim punch, and Sparrow's reduced tracking duration and lower Stinger Bolt health. These directly address elements that were widely seen as overly punitive, right? Without stripping away their core design completely. The aim seems to be a healthier competitive environment where counterplay is more viable against these legends, making them less frustrating to face while keeping their tactical niches. It's about creating interaction, not just, overwhelming deterrence.
I'm just not entirely convinced that line hasn't been crossed, though, especially for Caustic. Removing aim punch and slowing the gas damage ramp up, that could significantly weaken his deterrent capabilities. His gas just becomes less impactful for area denial, which is absolutely fundamental to his kit. It potentially undermines the very resurgence he's had recently in the meta. The goal of making him forgiving might inadvertently make him too passive, sacrificing that unique zone control identity that makes him viable in the first place. And for Sparrow, look at the combination. reduced tracking duration, significantly lower Stinger Bolt health, 400 down from 550, and the extra traps upgrade now only giving 1 extra trap instead of 2. That could render him too vulnerable, too ineffective. These combined changes might just push him out of competitive viability altogether, rather than simply balancing his frustrating elements. It feels potentially like an over-nerf, crossing that line from balanced to weak. And for a legend who wasn't exactly top-tier dominant recently anyway.
Well, I believe these changes are more about making those legends interactive. The developers aren't just deleting their utility, they're refining it so that counterplay is a more viable option, a real possibility. Caustic's gas still creates zones of denial, sure, but it now demands a bit more strategic commitment from him rather than just being a guaranteed shutdown button. And similarly, Sparrow's traps, they still track, but they require better placement, perhaps a more aggressive follow-up from Sparrow to really capitalize on the information. It shifts the burden of skill more towards the player using them, and ideally, creates more dynamic engagements for both sides. So, in conclusion, this patch signifies a truly deliberate, I think, and comprehensive effort to refine the Legend roster. By carefully calibrating individual abilities, introducing these targeted enhancements, the developers are actively working to cultivate a more dynamic and skill-expressive meta. They seem to be moving away from some of the previous rigid power structures and the explicit dev notes scattered throughout the source material. They offer really crucial insight into what seems like a thoughtful design philosophy, one that prioritizes both player experience and competitive integrity. This isn't just a random list of changes. It feels like a strategic evolution that's asking players to adapt and innovate.
Yeah, while the intentions behind these legend balance changes are definitely commendable, you have to admit their execution presents a complex picture. It really highlights the inherent challenges of game design, especially in a live service environment like Apex. Some adjustments, as we've discussed, risk inadvertently diminishing core legend identities, or perhaps just replacing existing frustrations with new, maybe unforeseen challenges. It's pretty clear that achieving true meta health in a game like this is an ongoing, iterative process, kind of a constant tightrope walk. These changes, while significant, give us a really rich and detailed case study for ongoing analysis of their actual real-world impact and whether they truly foster the kind of diversity the developers seem to be aiming for. The source material itself provides compelling evidence for multiple interpretations of these balance changes, which just underscores how granular tweaks can have these profound ripple effects throughout the competitive landscape. It definitely suggests there is always more to explore in the ongoing evolution of the game.